is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
While we are living in the golden age of wrestling documentaries, everywhere you look, we're getting all this knowledge, all these stories, they're all coming to us. And I feel like these two individuals have a lot to do with the, I don't know if it's a renaissance, because I don't know when the previous golden age of wrestling documentaries would be, but they've certainly added to this. Jason Eisner, Evan Husney, Dark Side of the Ring, Season 3. I mean, what more can I say, guys?
Oh my gosh, what an intro.
Right?
Thank you.
Well, it really is.
The
I mean,
golden age.
I was thinking about that, and it's like, you know, with wrestling documentaries literally everywhere now, you know, I mean, with Vice, I feel like doubling down not only because of how many episodes you guys have this season, but also that we double dipped on the Confidential show. You know, and got the chance to revisit all those. And then, of course, everything's WWE is doing on A&E and all the stuff that's popping up on Peacock. It's like literally there's new wrestling documentaries all the time. And I feel like, not to blow too much smoke up your ass, but Dark Side of the Ring, putting out documentaries that first season on these, on like, you know, Bruiser Brody and topics like that, I think opened up a lot of people's eyes to how much interest there was just in these stories as stories.
Yeah, I've heard that, you know, from you know, executives, you know, all across the, you know, spectrum of television, being like, well, why do that many people want to tune in to see a story about the Von Erichs, you know, and that being kind of puzzling, because I think that is the most highly rated episode of season 1. I could be wrong, but I think it is, and so I think that's kind of just been like, well, it's because it's the strength of the story. It's not necessarily like, let's get the biggest name, the biggest icon, you know, or whatever. It's just, and for us, that's what it was. It was like, what's the most captivating story that even a non-wrestling fan is going to go, whoa, what?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we started.
Yeah, I mean, nothing should surprise me anymore after the Herb Abrams doc. That's kind of the, like, linchpin, I feel like. But, like, how do you guys, it's just so great what you guys are doing, because you are now at the point where not only are you pitching, but getting made. You're like, okay, season 3, it's a hot show now. We got to follow it up. These have to be good. Do you guys know anything about XPW? Because we're going to do a movie about XPW.
We got to, you know, at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that, but how do you pitch these things? Like XPW, for example, that, you know, you're going into a boardroom and, like, the people running Vice don't know anything about, you know, XPW.
Yeah, well, that slideshow was pretty captivating. You should have seen the deck on XPW. No, I mean, you know, obviously, I think what's great about the partnership that we have with Vice is obviously they trust, you know, at this point, you know, the things that, you know, we can tell. And I think the fact that shows like Herb Abrams, you know, rated well for Vice, you know, and that's like, I mean, obviously, aside from, I mean, it's a very obscure name in wrestling, but a great story. And again, it goes back to that. I think that, you know, I'm grateful that the credibility we've built with the show that allows us to be like, all right, we're doing XPW for this show. But yeah, I mean, you know, for us, it's like, you know, that was an episode in particular. I mean, I was not an XPW guy, you know, I didn't really watch it, you know, growing up. It definitely the stories and the legends that you hear about it over the years, you know, was definitely caught my attention. And then, but seeing the overwhelming number of viewers of ours wanting to see that was like, you couldn't ignore the number of, you know, XPW or Messiah requests that we got. And it really kind of forced us to be like, okay. Like we gotta look in this. And I'm so glad we did, because you guys will not believe that when you see it.
And for us too, it's so much like funner to do the more like deep cut kind of stories. You know, because we're obsessive, you know, fans of wrestling, like history, and being able to introduce people to sides of wrestling, you know, even just, you know, casual fans of wrestling, to get to introduce them to like a whole other side that they haven't, you know, gotten to see before.
Yeah. And I think too, like, you got this amazing opportunity, right, to like make movies that are telling these wrestling stories on like TV for normies. And like, you know, why waste the opportunity on stories that we all already know? Like, let's go deep in some of these, because like I saw them the other day at my parents' house in my, you know, old bedroom. I opened up one of the closets and I just saw a stack of XPW DVDs. I had all of them, like just going through. What was the story with XPW that made you realize like we can do this? Because obviously you touched on like the New Jack, Vic Grimes stuff in the New Jack story, but what was that thing that you were like, okay, there's enough here? You're like, okay, yep, we can do a movie about this.
Well, I think it's with that story in particular, it's like there's a lot to cover. Like there's a lot of possible ways you could tell that story in terms of just like the wild, weird world of XPW. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of scandals and weird things to talk about. But for us, it's always like, what can you get that's going to be a really compelling, you know, firsthand moment you can live in, you know, because our show obviously has that reenactment portion, and you know, it has like, you know, we want to draw you in and you know and sort of suck you into that world, and it's hard to not kind of build around, you know, Messiah's story. I mean, that is such a wild story when you think about, you know, here's the guy who is missing a thumb now. You know, is crazy. So, you know, that was one, I think, you know, because he does feel like also so closely connected to XPW. You know, he feels like an XPW star. I mean, he's kind of one of the guys that emerged really out of that. So you can kind of tell, you know, his experience and the company, but also there's so, you know, you have, you know, Rob Black, and you have so many just different interesting personalities that came in and out of there. And yeah, it's going to be a wild ride. That's for sure.
When we like announced that episode too, like you know, I don't get really reached out to many people in the like film industry too much like about the show. But when it got announced at XPW that we were covering that story, one of my favorite filmmakers, Don Cascarelli, like reached out to me, who did, you know, Phantasm, Beastmaster, Bubba Hotep. And he was at all the old XPW shows. He was like telling me like him and his son went to all the shows in the high school auditoriums, and like it was like that like got me really excited too, because like, oh my god, like one of my favorite filmmakers is like that like I'm covering like an XPW story.
Yeah. Were you worried at all in the way you covered XPW specifically? Because like when you think about it, you're like, okay, we're covering this story. Like most of the main players are still around and still kicking and alive and doing stuff. Rob Black is obviously still around, and Messiah is still around, and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, like if we say things that piss people off, literally the story we're telling is that a wrestler pissed off a promoter and maybe related, some guys broke into his house and cut off his thumb. Like, should we be treading lightly with XPW?
I mean, it's not. I mean, that is you know, alleged. First of all, it's alleged, not confirmed that those events are related in any way.
No.
But I mean, you know, look, there's been stories we've told on this show. I remember, not to just put you on the spot, Jason, but you know, when we did the Dino Bravo story, there were times where we were, you know, a little freaked out, and Jason had an interesting experience that followed that.
Yeah, like I was like a victim of having my identity stolen after we like did that episode, and they like got into my bank account, into my email, and you know, worked with investigators and like found that like where it was coming from was in Laval, like where Dino Bravo and all his operations were going down, and like, and then I get on the phone, like it all happened through my like phone as well too, and I'm talking to like this guy on the phone, and he's from the phone company, and he's telling me like this is the work of the Montreal Mafia, and I was like, oh my god, like I'm being targeted by the Mafia now, like like someone doesn't want us to like tell this story. But that honestly, yeah, that sucked, because it was middle of season 2, and like we were dealing with crazy deadlines, and then having to deal with my identity being stolen was awful.
Yeah,
so
especially because it's like, all I want to do is make this documentary about Dino Bravo right now. And
I'm just trying to put over Dino here, guys. Like, what are you doing?
Just trying to get a Dino Bravo action figure made.
Yeah.
God damn.
Yeah. Do you look at that and you're like, there's a Dino Bravo action figure being made now. It's like, come on, guys. Let's get some of that cut coming our way. Like, clearly, we put him over. Okay,
How many sleepless nights? You know how many sleepless nights there were trying to make this Dino doc?
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, we had our car broken into in the Gino episode. So we've had some moments where it's like, but I mean, I think at least, you got to do the due diligence, and we always try and show all sides of the story and be as understanding as we can. So, So hopefully we'll make it out okay.
The other one that I was super excited about is FMW. I think I texted one of you guys after you were on the show last time asking you to do an Onita documentary. I've asked multiple people to do Onita documentaries, so like I was really excited.
Yeah.
When FMW was there.
I mean, oh man, my lockdown, like during the first big epic lockdown of last year, my whole viewing was, there's a guy named Brett out there who's the FMW historian, and he runs like an Instagram. He's got a website, that's amazing. And you go on the website and he's got like, here's my top 100 FMW matches in order. And it's amazing because I was making my way through and like, yeah, he's right. And, but that was my lockdown quarantine viewing, was going through FMW and just being like, Jesus Christ, this is some of the best wrestling I've ever seen because not only just like, I mean, you talk about the women's matches are unbelievable. You talk about, and of course, as filmmakers, it's the most successful cinematic wrestling I've ever seen. And I don't just mean in the terms of like Undertaker's WrestleMania cinema match, whatever they call it. Because this is all of that, but in front of like, 30, 40,000 people at Kawasaki. That's what's so cool about it, is that they're able to make those matches feel so cinematic. It like amidst a giant crowd. And like when you watch the Terry Funk and Onita first exploding ring match, it's not just that there's an exploding ring why it's amazing. It's also amazing because of the emotion. And you have like a character like Onita rushing in there to save his master, or save his, save the guy that really inspired all of this. And he's my hero, and I gotta wake him up before he explodes to death. And then of course after that, it's just these two guys, arm in arm marching to the back with tears in their eyes, and there's fog and smoke everywhere, and there's amazing, beautiful, emotional Japanese guitar solo work happening, and that's underlying it all. And that to me is just someone thinking about the production of wrestling on a way that no one else is, and or like, let's just put a ring in a body of water and have wrestlers take fucking boats out to the ring.
It's the best. It's the best.
Like, give me that action figure play set while we're talking about action figures.
Yeah.
But anyway, so for me, it's like this one to do this was just like an opportunity. Obviously, there's an amazing human story in the Onita saga, and of course, what happened after, after Onita handed the company over to the ring announcer. There's a whole other saga there that's a fascinating human story. But this is a real kind of also opportunity that I just want to show people FMW, like check it out. Like, so seriously.
Cool. And speaking of your shirt there, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you got Leatherface that, is performing in FMW. Like, how cool is that?
Like, it's, Leatherface. Freddie would pop up from time to time. They'd all be there.
God.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, I think like it's so I thought it was so funny that XPW and FMW were both on this list, because I feel like deathmatch wrestling gets a bad rep because of the type of deathmatch wrestling. No disrespect, that a lot of the XPW death matches were, which is like very little emotion, very little storytelling, just like, just having a barbed wire match for the sake of a barbed wire match, or having weapons for the sake of weapons. Like, I really feel, and FMW did this a lot, that when you do these death matches and you tell those stories very dramatically, and like in the timing and the way these competitors are trying to avoid the weapons, not no selling, not like
exactly
throwing like oh my God, like this could kill me if I touch it. I gotta stay away from it. Like, that to me is how I got sucked in to that, and I felt like FMW was like the king of doing matches like that.
Oh yeah, like you go back and you watch the Toyota versus Megumi. Man, I'm blowing it. Kodo match. I think you watch that one, which I think tops Brett's list on his FMW website as the #1 match of all of FMW, which is this women's match that's a barbed wire exploding barbed wire match. And it's amazing because you see the philosophy that they put into those matches. Like it's not just, spot fest, if you know what people say. It is literally working with the barbed wire in a way that uses that maximizes the storytelling potential of it. And of course it's drawing 20,000-30,000 people or whatever. So it's just really exciting. It's just it's amazing wrestling.
Yeah, because I can't deal with like the gory aspect of deathmatch wrestling, but like you said, Sam, like using it as like a story and like it's like raising the stakes, that's like how FMW like really made it work.
Yeah, and I always felt like Mr. Pogo never got any love in the States. Like, so many people don't know who that guy is. Like, a lot of people know who Onita is, but people don't know who Mr. Pogo is. And I was like in high school, I took a Hacksaw Jim Duggan Hasbro and customized it so I could have a Mr. Pogo figure.
That's a good choice. A good choice for a Pogo, for sure.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming that Mr. Pogo has some screen time in the show.
We'll definitely make sure he gets in there. Also for me too, like growing up, obviously watching a lot of ECW, is where I was exposed to Masato Tanaka and Mike Awesome. And I still hold their matches as some of the best. For me, when I was growing up, I mean, those were the Heat Wave matches with those guys, or even the, One Night Stand. Like, those matches I would be showing friends, like, who don't really get or like wrestling, like, watch this shit, And so it's like, those two guys, obviously, huge part of FMW, and just amazing matches. So exciting, exhilarating, amazing matches. And yeah, it's just amazing. There's a lot of talent came out of that company.
Do you guys get into the WWE, like the fact, because there's that photo that exists, I don't know if you've seen it, that's like Vince McMahon and Onita together, and like I think Bruce Pritchard has like talked on his podcast about the fact that there was like maybe like a conversation at some point going like, what is this? And then they were like, nah. Like, I don't know how much story there is.
I've sort of heard that too. I don't think we had anybody really speak about it for our episode that I'm remembering, but I mean, could you imagine that? Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, wild.
And while I guess I didn't even. While we're on the time, there's a lot of deathmatch influence in this season, I guess, because this excited me, and I told you I found out because David Arquette let the cat out of the bag. Yeah. that Nick Gage
he spoiled all of season 3.
Yes, the whole thing. 3. Yep.
Yeah.
Nick Gage is Nick Gage is getting his own show.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, like I Nick Gage, like obviously I knew who Nick Gage was, but I probably in like 2008 maybe, I was doing like commentary at this indie group called Jersey All Pro, and Nick Gage was on every show, and like I swear to God, this is before like he went to jail for bank robbery or whatever, and like even then I was a grown ass man, like I was an adult, and I had those like I'm scared of that guy feelings that you have when you're a kid, and the heels are really playing heel, and you're like, I'm scared of him. Like I was like, I don't want to do a promo with Nick Gage. Like I think he's the real deal.
Yeah. That's what's interesting for us too. It's like, when it's a show, our thesis in a lot of ways always kind of goes between the blurred lines of like the character and the gimmick, and where does it separate, and who's the real person and between the gimmick. But with like Nick Gage, it's like you said, it's like he is for real. Like there doesn't seem to be a separation. It just seems to be he is Nick Gage, and that, like, I didn't know about it. Sorry.
I was just gonna say he brings that kind of kayfabe philosophy, or the old time, like he respects the old traditions of wrestling, which is interesting that he kind of brings into the deathmatch world. Like he doesn't want to. I think even in our interview, you'll see like he didn't want to like fully break kayfabe. But go on, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was just gonna say, like, he's like someone that you believe in, and for us, like, trying to dissect it, it was difficult, like you said, because he doesn't want to, like, he is guarded to like an extent, but I feel our show is gonna like show another side of him too, that like like for me, like I fell in love with him as like a person, who deals with a lot of things that I think a lot of people could relate to in a way. But his in-ring stuff is just so unbelievable, and for me it's like really hard to watch. But he's like he in his promos, he's just like he's like down to like die, like he says he's down to like die for his performance. And like when you watch like that Tournament of Death where he actually died, he died for several minutes when they were the paramedics were trying to get him to the hospital. It's like to go to a show and see that there is a guy who is like willing to do that to me like raises stakes like on another kind of level. It's like you go to a show and you don't know what to expect. Like he could take it to lengths that you didn't think were possible.
Well, it's like kind of like, dare I say, like G.G. Allen vibes, a little bit, in terms of like, like what am I? Well, especially like I remember after the first rough-ish cut of that episode that I remember when. Like it was just like, there was no standards and practices, hadn't seen the episode yet, like it was the unfiltered just footage from the Tournament of Death and everything. I was like, this is a snuff film. Like this, this is a horrifying thing. And I'm like looking up these guys I'd never heard of because I wasn't a really big deathmatch guy growing up. ECW, sure, but like just on that level. So I'm like, I don't know who Thumbtack Jack is, I'm like, got to figure out who Thumbtack Jack is, and you go look him up on YouTube, and he's like got syringes coming in and out of his face, in these I'm just like, Jesus Christ, but like watching all that shit was in the first cut, and I'm just like, this is a fucking snuff film we're making, guys. Like, we got to be careful. And this is obviously Standards and Practices came back and was like, no, like when we first submitted a lot of that shit. So, but still, it's an anxiety-inducing ride, that episode. But also just like kind of interesting for us because our most contemporary story we've ever done. And also it has a quality, and it's not the only episode this season too, that has the quality of really capturing, I think, a wrestler in a moment in time where I think that Nick Gage's story is not finished. In some ways it's like, he's got many chapters left. And I feel like where most of the times the stories we told, like, there is a clear end. And so I think it's interesting for us to kind of cover stories where you're sort of seeing, okay, here's what he's been through, but it's also like, this is a very specific moment in time for him, and where is it going to go from here? I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's really interesting timing for that, especially because like a couple weeks ago, he had the stare down with Mox.
Yeah.
And it's like this is very good timing. This is very good timing.
It's very good timing, and I mean, if I were Brett Lauderdale, promoter of GCW, I'd probably do the same. It's like, why not? And I also think too, it's cool because obviously it was really cool in that match because I watched it. As much as that stuff is hard for me to watch, I did watch it because. And it was cool to see in that moment. It was like Brett Lauderdale, Nick Gage, Jon Moxley in one ring, and it's like that is kind of the episode, more or less. Is those there's a few more voices, of course, in the episode, but like that's predominantly the voices in that show. And
that's awesome.
Wow, the episode comes to life.
That's so cool. Yeah, you also think about like you hear stories about people who don't psychologically get over injuries, like people who physically recover from injuries, but they don't really get over it. Like they're always scared to do certain moves again, or they just never feel because it's like the injury just kind of shatters your psyche. And like I can't imagine. No, I died, passed away, doing this, and then I came back to life, and then I kept doing it. I'd be like, well, it's crazy.
That's part of the Nick Gage psychology that we examine in the episode, because I remember specifically asking him. And also, Nick Gage was the very first interview I did for season 3, which is kind of fun. But I remember asking him about that, and it's like, like, was there ever a time where like that was it for you? And he's like, oh no, bro, I don't go out like that. It's like, No, I'm not going out like that, bro. You know, and so it's just like, you know, it's like, well, how are you going out? You know, like, what is it going to be? Like, you know?
Yeah. But it's like, yeah, there's a part of me that, like, I don't know. There's like artists that like you can't trust in a way that like makes it more intense when you watch their stuff.
Right.
My favorite filmmakers are the ones that do things that like that are unexpected, and like I can't, you know, I go into their films and I can't trust where they're going to take me. It's like the same with like Nick Gage. I'm attracted to that. Same with, there's lots of other wrestlers like that too, that there's a sense of like, I don't know what I'm going to see. Like I could see the most insane, horrific thing I've ever seen. Or, you know, it's just, that adds a whole other level of suspense to watching wrestling.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think you have to, I mean, it's the same way with filmmaking. Like you have to, there are certain filmmakers that you just have to take them for their vision and just either ride with them or not ride with them. Like if like you, there are other filmmakers that if they made the exact same choices, you'd be like, that movie sucked. Yeah. But because it's them and you know that they're just doing what's in their heart. Like this is what they wanted on the screen. There's a respect that you have for that because it's them. It's their vision. They're not trying to do anything except what they had in their head.
Totally.
And I guess that's Nick Gage too. He's not thinking like, okay, but what are the long-term ramifications of doing this? He's just like, how badass would it be if this were a thing that happened? I should do it.
Yeah, very true.
Short term.
Yeah.
Short-term planner.
Yeah. But then these things,
a lovable short-term planner. But
then these things exist. These things, like if it weren't for Nick Gage, the things that Nick Gage has done would not exist. Nobody else would do them. They wouldn't be here. So that's what he's given us.
I just sincerely hope, and I know Jason, you've said it too. It's like out of the Nick Gage episode, like I'm, like obviously, dude is over. You know, in the context of the wrestling world, like for those that know Nick Gage, he's extremely over. And in the episode, the point is made that like, you know, I think Vince McMahon or WWE or whomever would kill to have somebody with that sort of level of connection with his fans. You know, I mean, that guy has a real tangible sense of being over, you know? And it's like, I just hope out of the outcome of this episode that like, you know, he does get a bigger shot, you know? Yeah. And, you know, because I think, you know, because the guy doesn't have to work. Because I know from my standards and practices experience with our show that not a lot of GCW can make cable airwaves, but I do think, you know, Nick is versatile enough to be able to work in many different styles. Like he is, you know, he knows what he's doing, and I think it'd be really cool to see him in another, like hitting the next level. You know, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you look at like what Eddie Kingston has done in AEW,
I was just gonna say,
and the fact that like, you know, I've been a fan of Eddie Kingston for forever on the East Coast Indies, and that's one of those guys that I think, you know, the powers that be would say, well, that works on that small level, but that would never work on a big level. And I'm sitting there going like, he's like one of, if not the best guys in AEW. Like and that's
promo-wise, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. And it's like, yeah, it almost gets to the point where he's good in the ring, but he doesn't have to be good in the ring because he's already talked you there. And I think you're right. I think if Nick Gage if Nick Gage were to pop up in WWE or even in NXT or something like that, just being completely counter to anything that we're used to, but being believable. It's not you don't need to bring all the weapons and a sickle and a bed of nails, and just being believable and being violent in that way. You know, I think it would be amazing.
And it would be great. And I think also for longevity, it's good. And I also think AEW probably is the best home for him because I mean, yeah, Eddie Kingston, I could see him with Eddie Kingston having a run. I could see him with, you know, definitely Moxley. I mean, we're about to see that. You know, I could definitely see that there. I could see a lot of different stuff. I think he's such a good, believable personality and promo that I think it would work.
Yeah, guys like him and Nick Gage, they just have this level of charisma that you can't like manufacture. It's like it's not something you're gonna get in like a development like program at all.
No,
yeah,
no.
They've
lived life.
Yeah, that's like what reminds me of like some of the wrestlers that we grew up like loving as well too. There's just like there's this believability about their personality and charisma that you believe it, you know. And those two guys, Eddie and Nick, you just do. I fully believe them.
How did
they've lived? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
you go ahead.
I was just gonna say they both have lived life, and you can see that. And I think that's one of the reasons why wrestlers of, say a Jake the Snake Roberts, guy who's lived life, you know, and like you see it on him, and that's what he uses to perform, just like an amazing actor could too. It's like, you know, and I think that's something that's kind of missing, you know, is like, and that's what's so fascinating about wrestling from back in the day, because it's like you would take guys out of their wild life and then bring them into the world of wrestling, and then they just have to be who they are, just a little bit cranked up. And you know, Nick and Eddie and those guys, they fit that mold for sure, you know, just like this is who they are, but it's a little cranked up, you know.
Yeah, and sometimes it's nice to take some of that polish off too. Like it's good to have a slick, polished product, but sometimes it's nice to bring something in where you're like, that's not slick, like that's not polished, like that's real life.
Yeah, there's like an unhinged, or a Brian Pillman, you know.
Yes,
he was like breaking the fourth wall and stuff, you know. It's just like there's this unhinged thing about it that just makes you want lean in even more, you know, because they're breaking the norm.
They're going off script.
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say about the Brian Pillman episode, like I was a fan of Brian Pillman Jr. as a wrestler before. Like I was like, yeah, I like what he's doing. I think he's paying tribute in the right way. Like I think it could be hokey. I think the way he does it is not hokey. I think the mullet is actually like cool, and it kind of fits into that sort of nostalgic but new culture that I think is actually really cool right now. But like, man, especially episode 2, when he starts talking about kind of what happened in his life after Brian wasn't with us anymore. Like, I don't know, man, there's something, because like a lot of people have told sad stories on your docs, but like there's something about the relatability and the genuine way that kid comes across on that show that I was like I wanted to reach through the television set and give him a hug and go like, and it also made me go like, if you're making me feel that, like that translates. I feel like after that, I mean, he could be the biggest star in wrestling. I mean, he's I thought so highly of him.
Me too.
After that show.
Me too. And I think what's great is just that, like, you know, he's got such a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
That mullet is incredible. It's one of the best in the business. But no. All jokes aside, I was just so proud of him too after that interview, and I still remain to be. It's like he's such an amazing job. But I think that the things that he said at that end, especially about it with regards to his relationship to his mother, I think is something that is going to be so relatable and so inspiring, and even like has an effect on me. You know, just like there's aspects to everything he was talking about in that piece, and I think it's like, wow, it's so just like real, like hats off to him. Like, you know, Brian Jr. I just think the world of, and I just really hope that out of this too, like, you know, we're gonna see the rise of him. I would love to see that, but man, you know, just from the heart, true, sincere from the heart, you know. Yeah. And I love to see that.
I also like coming off of that 2-parter. Like I've always been a huge Brian Pillman fan. I was so glad that it was a part of this season, but and it wasn't just the loose cannon character. Like I was a huge Hollywood Blondes fan. I was big in like I wasn't even that big of a WCW fan, and I was like, no, the Hollywood Blondes is like that's there was some like the Hollywood Blondes. I was like, that's the truth. Meanwhile, it's a guy from Cincinnati and a guy from Texas. Neither one of them look like movie stars. And you're like, I don't, like, the gimmick doesn't make any sense. But for some reason, it's like, it's the best tag team in WCW.
Totally.
But almost, even it not making sense, because I get that, you know, like, they didn't look like Hollywood, like, actors. But that almost kind of worked
adds to the heel.
Yeah, because they're heels, right?
Yeah.
So it made me even like kind of more like mad at them.
Like
that's amazing.
Like how beautiful Bobby Eaton was not particularly handsome. Like
I love that. So great. Yeah. Beautiful Bobby, and it's like
what?
But amazing wrestler. Hey,
incredible wrestler. Incredible wrestler.
Yeah, one of the best.
And that's to say, like, the gimmick was even better.
It was
because of who he was. But like, and speaking of great mullets, but I also like it wasn't until it really clicked in watching that I was like, what made Brian Pillman special wasn't just because I feel like we concentrate so much on the loose cannon and concentrate so much on that he worked the business. And by the way, that NFL strength coach is like a star,
Jim Wood.
I mean, amazing. But like the fact that Pillman, he got over doing everything. Like Flying Brian was over. Like Flying Brian was a star in WCW. He got over doing Flying Brian, and then he got over as the Hollywood Blonde, and then he got over as the Loose Cannon, and then he got over in the Hart Foundation. Like there was no point. Like a lot of times, like even when you're talking about Steve Austin, it's like Stunning Steve. Like okay, that's cool. Hollywood Blondes is great. Ringmaster, not so much. Okay, here comes Stone Cold, and it's like you're going on these ebbs and flows. And like for Pillman, yeah, some things were over more than others, but like everything was over.
Yeah,
and the Pillman's got a gun. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Pillman's got a gun thing too is so wild in hindsight.
Amazing.
But it's like, yeah, I mean, it is amazing. Like it's so wild. And I know Steve still thinks really highly of that angle because, and he says in the episode about how, that he wants to do things that are always real and gritty and push the boundaries and all that stuff. And that's what all would happen, after that. And it's amazing to see how, back in the context of, that's still the old WWF logo. Wasn't that still like
that's still block letters. Oh yeah, that was block letters.
Yeah. Like this is like we're talking like you'd see like Doink and shit on TV, right? At that time still. Yeah, and then dudes whipping a gun out like and Doink's on next. Like, that's like fucking that's crazy.
Yeah. It's
crazy. Yeah.
There was also something about Brian too, because like I've gone through thousands of hours of archival footage for all these shows. But when you watch like Brian, like whenever he like comes to the camera or he grabs the camera and he stares down the camera, he like knows to look like just directly down the lens of it in such a way that like I felt like other wrestlers didn't quite. Like they would look at the camera, but the way it like Brian knew that he had to like reach in there into the into the TV to like really grab people's attention, that to me really floors me.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that really just impressed the shit out of me about Brian and Kim Wood, the NFL strength coach and everything, just because we're talking movies too here. But one thing that was so cool to me to like learn is like, when I showed up to Kim Wood's house, I think there was like a lot of like, okay, this kid here, and his hair and, or whatever, like he was sizing me up. And then he's like trying to tell me about like how no, Brian was really the smart guy and he was super well read and he was watched tons of movies and he was just like a sponge absorbing different things throughout his whole life. And then he's like, and Brian liked this movie, House of Games, and I'm just like, oh, it's one of my favorite. I love that movie. It's incredible, and he's like, House of Game, so then we can connect. But House of Games is so crucial because in that moment when Bischoff is kind of denying that, for anyone to say that I was being worked in this, in this way, it would be totally false. And then Kim comes in with like one of the best lines of the show where he's like, the best way to break up with a woman is is to make them think it's their idea.
Yeah.
And it's like so interesting because that is the concept of this movie House of Games, which I'm always wondering if that really spoke to Brian because that's, it's a David Mamet movie about a ring of con men. And this outsider, she's a author, journalist. She gets sucked into this world of con man and thinks she's in the inner circle and thinks she's believing that she's going to be writing this amazing book about the inner workings of con men. But then they just totally use her for a con and just discard her, and totally just freaking worked her. And that's the movie. And I wonder if that's, made such an impression on him. It must have at that time to be like, okay, now I know how to manipulate all of this. And he's thinking about this business on a level that nobody is, and that to me is just like, wow, man, he was really thinking about it in a different way.
It's funny too. We hear every once in a while, like wrestlers back then, like, I don't know if that's still the case. They were watching movies. They were like watching movies and taking inspiration from movie characters and
Leatherface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extreme example.
I know I'm fucking around.
Yeah. I mean, now you probably have people that are, video games are so narrative now and they're so popular among wrestlers that you've probably got I don't know the video game world like that, but I'm sure like Xavier Woods is figuring out ways to like, weave kind of video game narrative into his own narratives and stuff like that.
You should, even like
Totally.
it's a weird sidetrack here, but in the Brian Pillman Part 2 story, it was like you hear that story of like when Brian Pillman Jr. is living with his mom and his this stepfather boyfriend. who was like really abusive towards him. And for Brian, he was kind of confined to a room and didn't really have any friends or wasn't taught any sports growing up, but he had his Nintendo GameCube to be his like a universe that he could escape into. And I don't want to spoil it, but something like happens to that. And like at one point that wasn't even going to be in the show, but we thought like that is something, that like, we can obviously like relate to, but I think like a lot of people out there could, that's just an eye-opening moment. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, and who, maybe from abusive households, kids that are escaping into, video games. And, it's just,
but yeah, I mean, I think even the way you guys and I, like the way we treat wrestling, it's like, there's a reason we're so obsessed with it. Like it's an escape. Like we love going into that world. Like, I mean, that's a universal thing. Like you can say, video games are stupid, and then like spend 2 hours talking about FMW. And it's like, how do you not see that this is the same thing?
First off, get us that video game made, somebody. Yeah. Second of all, yeah, I mean, 9 times out of 10, when we interview these wrestlers, when we're interviewing, it's either we had their kid, we had their kid. We had their action figure as a kid, or I played as you on WCW NWO Revenge.
Yeah.
Right.
So my connection is like, like either I beat you, when my friend played as you, or I played as you and kicked some ass, So our connection to a lot of these, wrestlers are through video games and action figures. And that's such a huge part of our generation and how we related to wrestling growing up. Those games were awesome too, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So like one way that I was exposed to wrestlers, and I actually talked to Andrew Goldstein about this, who was the showrunner on the Confidential show, about how magazines, when I was a kid, exposed me to a lot of guys. And like there are a lot of guys that I would never see wrestle, except I saw their pictures in magazines and I knew they were awesome because of the magazines. And one of those people was Bruiser Bedlam.
Oh.
And like, so I always knew who he was, but I never knew him, I never, like, he was just, how did you guys end up kind of coming across the Bruiser Bedlam story and deciding on that one as one to tell this season?
Well, it was always like you heard over the course of making the show, you heard kind of just the log line, like, here's wrestler who might have blown up police station, was the log line. And it was that always, I mean, how could you ignore that? It's just so like, absurd. But so some fans had, or some viewers of the show had, suggested that over the years, but it was really like when we got the season 3 train rolling, it was, I think I was calling Jim Cornette about just being in the Pillman episode. And then he was like, okay, you guys, you got to do this time around. It's time. You got to do Bruiser Bedlam, a.k.a. Johnny K9. I need to know the truth of this story. So it is a special request
from
Jim Cornette.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he made the request, and I'm so glad that he did, because that episode was, again, every season we have our handful of episodes that are just discovery pieces that we don't know much going in. Everything's new. The interviews are exhilarating. And this is definitely that. And it's just such a interesting story about, for those who don't know, I mean, he was a jobber in the WWF as Johnny K9, in the late 80s, early 90s, and around the Ontario area when WWF would come through. But then he gets a run with Jim Cornette at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Jim rebrands him as Bruiser Bedlam, this just huge monster heel guy. And then after about a year of that run, he kind of faded away, but he was living this whole other secret life as a chapter president of the Satan's Choice motorcycle gang in Hamilton, Ontario, raising a bunch of hell. And, is alleged to have been part of blowing up a police station, as I said, but also a double homicide he was alleged to have been a part of. Never found, never convicted or whatever on that, but still a lot of rumors flying around. So we interviewed like a former biker gang member. We interviewed, journalists, members of the police who were hunting after him for many years, and his former wife. And it's just a sweeping sort of like true crime biker gang wrestling jobber story that's just one of my more exciting to drop for sure.
Yeah, and what's cool about him too is like, a lot of the cases our stories are involving a wrestler that, they have their gimmick life and their home personal life. With Johnny K9, it's like, there's the wrestler, and then there's like the biker gang leader, and then there's like this really goofy like guy that everyone seems to just love and seems to be this like, lovable goofball,
eccentric teddy bear.
Yeah. But then there's like these, these two other extreme lives that he's like living. So that was really fascinating, and I think it's one of Evan and I's like favorite episodes from the season.
That's awesome.
Definitely my favorite reenactments so far. I'll say that.
Yeah, they were the funniest ones to do. Like, and even like, because we get some interesting background performers, and like we were doing this scene where the Johnny Canine character is getting inducted into the
Satan's
Choice like biker gang, and they're going to give him his vest, and it's like they're presenting him with his colors. And so I'm setting up the shot, and I'm getting this one biker to put it on him, and all of a sudden this background performer who's a biker in the scene, he's like, I've seen this happen before. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I've seen this go down. I've been to one of these. I was like, whoa, you've been to one of these ceremonies? And the AD tried to get him to shut up. And I was like, no. Let this man
him speak.
Explain. He grabs the vest and he like pulls it up. And he's like, all right, when I fucking show you this vest, this is the greatest day of your fucking life. All right. It's amazing. It's so fun to do.
Oh,
God,
that's so great. I mean, we could spend another hour talking about more of these episodes. I'm so glad that you're doing Collision in Korea. That's one of those that like, I've kind of, every time I've interviewed Eric Bischoff, I have a question or two for him, but I've always wanted to just sit down and talk to him strictly, because I'm fascinated by anybody that's been to North Korea at all. Like anybody that's been on a trip to North Korea, I'm like, let's talk for a while and just tell me what that world is like. So the idea that there was a wrestling show over there, I can't wait for that one.
The idea that Scott Norton was over in North Korea is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Taking a busload of wrestlers to North Korea that probably don't even really know what North Korea was all about at the time either.
Yeah.
That's kind of the premise of the episode, is like in over their head. Like it's mostly from the American wrestlers' point of view of like being completely in over their head and not knowing where they are and learning very quickly where they are. And Scott Norton, basically, just to put a, just to talk about the episode for a second.
Yeah.
Scott Norton was just like, it's like being in the Twilight Zone, and as soon as he said that just like everything clicked for us, and we're like, okay, we're leaning into that. So this episode is the Twilight Zone version of Dark Side of the Ring. So like all the music has the Bernard Herrmann sweeping strings, and everything is a little off and surreal and it's like a dream. We tried to make it all feel like this was some crazy dream that happened that didn't really happen, but it did, which is the crazy part.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that not only did you figure out a way to get Scott Flash Norton on the show, but once you got him on, he actually inspired the entire episode.
Yeah.
Like that's Scott Norton.
Oh man, dude, Scott Norton,
Incredible.
just great interview, great guy, and his interview is really great in this episode. And he really wanted to. He was super happy to do it. Wanted to nail it. He was very prepared and really wanted to do the story justice, which he did. I mean, of course.
That's great.
Well, like what I love too is like he is. I just remember him as such a monster of a wrestler, like on screen, like such a beast, and to see him be vulnerable, and talk about being scared, and like I think our interview like brings him back, and like you can tell, like he was afraid for his life, and so that's, to me, it's like seeing the toughest guy who was best friends with Hawk, being like scared for his life, like it's that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have. I guess you have 14 episodes, 13 topics, right? This season for Dark Side of the Ring, which is just amazing. I already bought the whole season on Apple, so that no matter when I want it, I could just be up at 2:00 in the morning and just start scrolling through topics once they air and
awesome.
Find everything. But it's on Vice, of course, Thursday nights. For the next 13 weeks, I guess, which is amazing. Do you have anything in the chamber? Because now, third season, like, you've done 20 plus episodes, if not more. Like, are there, not that you have to tell me necessarily if you don't want to, but are there topics that you're like, I'm still itching for that one. I'm still itching like that. Not that one specific thing. Like we got to do this.
Yeah, there definitely are. Like there's some, we have to keep kind of close to our chest.
Of course.
We just want to be very sensitive to, the family members and be the first to kind of reach out about them. But yeah, there's some that have been since the very first season that, we've wanted to try and do. And it just either wasn't the right time or we couldn't get the access. But like one that we've wanted to do is a story about Gentleman Chris Adams.
Yes.
And with our season 1, we kind of consider the Bruiser Brody and the Von Erich and Gino Hernandez episode to be this like Texas trilogy that we created. That's based on that world-class championship sort of world. And so yeah, we always wanted to
it's like
tell the fourth story, which really felt like, or there's definitely more. We'd love to do the Freebird story. We can get into that too, but like Chris Adams, like whenever his name would come up while making all 3 seasons of the show, whenever his name would show up, he like someone would have like the craziest story about him. Like you just hear how he like super kicked some bartender in the face and knocked out his eyeball in Israel. They had to like smuggle him back to America in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
There's so many like insane stories like that, and then when you hear about like how his life ended and his best friend killed him out of self-defense, it's just it's just unbelievable story. It is kind of crazy that we haven't gotten to it yet, but I feel, that's just one we've been wanting to tell.
Got to keep a few in the chamber.
Yeah, got to.
If another season happens, that'd be great.
I love that you have your own, like Kevin Smith has his Jay and Silent Bob universe. You have your own world-class universe that you have this little pocket here.
Definitely.
And also... real quick compliment too. It was the first time the Brian Pillman episode was the first time that I've seen the Steve Austin studio shot in a way where you could see the door to like the other room in his house, and it really brought home like, bro just has this Steve Austin bar and studio in his house. That's incredible.
It's in that.
Yeah,
he's got like a house behind his house with it in there, which is amazing. And he actually closed that door, and I was like, leave it open.
Genius. Genius move. I love it. And
not
it's
to
separated.
put myself over or anything. But
no, you're genius.
Open,
you're genius.
Yeah,
what can I tell you?
I think it was like the laundry room or something.
No, it was a kitchen.
Oh, okay.
Well, Jason, Evan, you guys are doing the Lord's work. I know every wrestling fan in the world is so happy that you guys are doing this series and that it continues. And I know we're all obsessed with it and we all love it. So thank you guys. And I can't wait to continue. I can't wait to watch literally every episode this season. So thank you guys. It's always fun talking to you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.